Everyone knows the Marc Marquez story, the rookie title, the insanely dominant 2014, the whole career with Honda that seemed like it would go on forever until the broken arm and then all the other injuries and then Ducati Renaissance that's proved so much this season. But what if he hadn't gone to Honda? What if he hadn't broken his arm? When we asked you for your Marc Marquez related questions as part of our competition with our partners Insta360, we had, as you expect, a deluge of hundreds and hundreds of them. Lots of our favorites were about the what ifs. The what if he had been on a different bike at a different time? What if he was on a different bike right now? How different would MotoGP history look? So for the final part of our series of Marquez-related specials with Insta360, me, Matt Beer, Simon Patterson, and Val Hurinchi are gathered on the Race MotoGP podcast to basically rewrite history and look at some ways MotoGP would look different if different things had happened around the phenomenon that is Marquez. We've got quite a few of these to get through, and we're trying to get through them quite quickly, knowing that tangents will occur in anything hypothetical. So going straight in, the first question we're going to go for in this episode is from Johan from Norway, who says, given what Marc Marquez has accomplished on the Ducati over the past 2 seasons, how do you think he would have done if he'd ridden the Ducati from 2017 through 2020? So I love how specific this is, not just for like the last couple of years when Ducati's been really dominant, but basically the Dovi era. How would Marc Marquez have done on that bike? Val, you answered this when we did a bit of a tease of this on the race website, so go for it. You go first.
Yeah, you get the feeling that, I mean, I guess he wins them all is the easy answer there, and it's sort of the simple one. I mean, Dovi was runner-up 3 times in 17, 18, 19. Marc was better than Dovi, so the math is simple there. And then 2020 was an open goal. It was an open goal created by Marc Marquez's injury at the start of the season. He was going to win that season on a Honda that was no longer as good as the Ducati. So if you give him a Ducati, you keep him healthy. In theory, it's as simple as he gets that one over the line too. But, you know, we're talking also adaptation period. Jorge Lorenzo at the time showed, maybe Jorge Lorenzo wasn't the most adaptable rider, but he showed that getting onto a Ducati from a Yamaha proved like a 14, 15-month job ultimately. And Jorge Lorenzo's input into the development process of that Ducati is what a lot of people will link to the fact that the Ducati became what it is right now, which is instead of a limited, a machine with some very obvious strengths, not, you know, straight line speed, sort of, you know, sharp corners, not really corner speed, just anything that isn't corner speed, basically, turned into a bike whose strengths are everything and whose weaknesses are nothing. And again, like Jorge Lorenzo, whatever role he actually played, however it would have played out with a different rider, we certainly do know that he was a crucial element on Ducati's path to this modern bliss that it has with all riders being able to ride its bike. Would Marc be the same? I don't know. I don't know that the Ducati will have become as strong as it is right now under Marc, and that's not to compare Marc and Jorge's development riders. That's to say that Marc would have clicked faster, and there may have been the Honda problem of, well, this doesn't need a root and branch change. This doesn't need a fundamental overhaul. If Marc is already succeeding on this bike. With Jorge Lorenzo, you know, they paid him a lot of money, a lot of money. So they had to, then they were already pot committed to do fairly extreme things on his side of the garage to make it work. They did make it work. They didn't make it work for a very long time. Obviously, he was gone just as he started winning, got injured too. So we never saw the full potential of that. With Marc, that necessity, that urgency maybe wouldn't have been there. I still think that if you look at what the bike already was at that point in time, if he stays healthy, there isn't really anybody who stops him those years, is there? Unless that means Lorenzo stays on a Yamaha.
Well, this is the big thing with any hypothetical. What if this person's on this bike then? Who's on the bike that they were on? So, Simon, who do you think's on the Honda in 2017 to 20 if Marquez isn't? And what does that mean?
Oh, you've put me in the spot now. I don't know. Who ends up at Honda? Maybe someone like Alex Rins, maybe Maverick Vinales. It would be someone fast and young in Spanish. To join Pedrosa, it would definitely be someone young. But I mean, the Honda at that point was already starting to fade. That was the beginning of the end of the Honda dominance. So whoever it was in for a hard time, and they weren't gonna deliver much. They weren't gonna affect things substantially. It maybe it was going to be Jorge Lorenzo, and we all know how that ended. Whenever we did get to see it eventually, but for me, the only thing that really changes that whole period is that Dovey wins more races. Because I think while Marc's adapting, Dovey has a chance to win a couple more races to add to his CV. But I think ultimately Marc wins more titles because he wins 20. He doesn't fall off and hurt himself pushing like an idiot. And I think that it would have made racing more dull for those few years. Because 17, 18, 19 was the last era, at least for now, of bikes that were substantially different, that meant that you rode corners in different ways and set up all those like cliffhanger last corner battles between Marc and Dovey or Marc and Fabio Quartararo. And I think if you put Marc on a Ducati, Dovizioso loses some of his strength in those battles because Marc's suddenly riding a bike that brakes as well as his and his accelerates out as well as his. So there's no opportunity for Dovey to be smart the way that he was. And I think just racing becomes a bit more processional a bit earlier, and Marc wins everything and is like still winning titles now on the Ducati.
Yeah, that's the scary thing. If he turns up on the Ducati in 2017 before the Ducati's definitely good, then that relationship doesn't break. If anything, that would have to involve Marc getting bored for that relationship to break at that point. Maybe he's not even right. Maybe he's done by now. Maybe he's had so much success that he's actually...
That's a realistic thing, yeah. Because he's beaten Lorenzo, he's beaten Rossi's records, he's beaten Agostini's records, he's the greatest of all time statistically. Game over. Bye.
He's just Alex's manager and coach.
Yeah.
He might be gone in 18. At the end of 18, I think that's possible.
I think the Rossi record is the thing that he's still chasing to this day.
Well, so Ducati paid out for Lorenzo big time in 17, 18, and course corrected very significantly after that, and to the point where we still talk about Ducati as a sort of as a manufacturer that doesn't offer huge base salaries and compensates through with bonuses, but generally it just isn't the place that you go to make bank necessarily. That is not its reputation. So we're talking about Marc, who never ended up having his big Honda payday for 4 years. Well, 3 years, it ended up in the end. We're talking about, I think, some career earnings left on the table. We're talking about other manufacturers, specifically, I think Honda, again, having the financial muscle to compete. And we're talking about if he comes in and he starts winning on the Ducati right away, he will maybe not wrongly think that, I could do this on other bikes too. So I wonder, I just don't see it being like a 6-year thing, an 8-year thing. Not really.
So he comes to Ducati, he wins 17, 18, 19, 20 on the Ducati, and then he's the 2022 KTM World Champion.
Or something like that. Yeah, sure.
22.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a world in which KTM moves faster to get Marquez, possibly, if this is happening.
Or a world where it's easier to get Marquez.
Yeah, because he broke with Honda already. Yeah. Well, and that, breaking with Honda was the big decision. Once you've once he was committed to a life of...
Yes, exactly. So if we presume that he's gone in 17, then he's an easier free agent at the end of every contract.
Yeah. Okay, this was a very fun start already. Let's stay on that kind of tangent. We'll stay in this kind of era rather, because it's another Dovey related one. Tim Ross asked, what do the last dozen years of MotoGP look like without Marc Marquez? Does Dani Pedrosa get a championship? Does Dovey win titles? Does Alex Marquez win this year's title? So now we're completely removing Marquez from history. Val, you answered this one in the website version, but I'm going to let Simon go first this time. So Marc Marquez just isn't a thing. What happens?
The Pedrosa bit is the really interesting bit of this for me, because does the bike then become more Dani friendly and less Marquez friendly? Does Dani crash less because he's riding a bike that's a bit more manageable? Or does the Honda still, inevitably go the direction that the Honda goes and becomes what it became that forced Marc to leave? That's the question, because if the Honda continues its trajectory, the one that we saw, the one that we got to see, then Dani never wins a title anyway, because he just gets injured, as he did in real life. Dani's I know that the reason Dani didn't win a title is because he was always up against great riders. But a lot of that was before Marc turned up. And after Marc turned up, Danny did a lot of time falling off and hurting himself and spending time watching MotoGP races, in his hospital bed, getting arm pump surgery, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it changes things substantially for Danny. I think Dovi is definitely a MotoGP world champion in that world. But I think that right. So Jorge Lorenzo will win more at Yamaha.
And stay longer, I would guess.
And stay longer. But then the question is, does Valentino Rossi sneak another championship in? I can't believe I'm going to air this in the podcast, but does he win 2015?
Well, there'll be no one next to
happens.
him. He'll do that kick just at the air, just like a little celebratory kick, like a ghost of a future that doesn't exist.
I mean, I think Rossi wins another title in that world.
We'll find out he just had an itchy leg, like Clint Boyer in that NASCAR race that time.
Oh, Jesus. What a reference. Incredible. Phenomenal. That's an interesting, because it's really tempting to just look at who finished second every season and go, well, there's your guys. But clearly it would not work out like that. There are things that happened that Marc, even when he wasn't winning, as you say, 2015, he played a big role in how that season turned out. Like everything changes. There's one vacant Honda seat at a time where Honda is one of the two manufacturers that you go to, and there's no other. So obviously the interest in that and the fight for that is insane. I have to imagine that, it's possible that Rossi Lorenzo lasts further as a sort of friendly ceasefire, but it is also possible that it falls apart earlier. With Marc's absence, suddenly, they're fighting for more earlier. Maybe Rossi slightly more in his prime, although it took him a little bit to get it back up to speed in the Yamaha return after Ducati, didn't it?
They took it to 15.
Yeah. So I wonder if Marc's absence at that time, obviously puts Jorge Lorenzo in a great position to win a couple. And then whether that impacts how much longer Rossi stays, whether Rossi, it starts being higher stakes between them in the absence of certainly Marc's dominant start to 2014. Somebody has to go to Honda. That sounds like a threat, I guess, but somebody has to go to Honda.
Probably the random winner from this that you'd never think is Cal Crutchlow. Because Cal Crutchlow becomes a Repsol Honda rider in this world, I think.
But not for long, you'd imagine.
He was consistently kind of the second best performing Honda rider through 17, 18, 19. So there has to, there was always the talk about, is he going to get a chance of et cetera, et cetera. So maybe Cal ends up on a Honda, wins a few more races.
To me, Cal's impressive Honda stint is so much in a Marquez context, because I felt like Cal was the person who got his head around what to do in a Marquez-dominated Honda, what the bike could do, what it couldn't do, and when the result was there, and what his function was better than other people did. So I don't know if Honda takes Cal as seriously if it hasn't got the Marquez context to put Cal into.
Does Andrea Iannone's career change completely? And I think it does, because at that point, suddenly, in the absence of Marc Marquez, the gold standard for riders who go super fast but maybe can't always be 100% trusted. I'm not saying that Andrea Iannone is Marc Marquez, but I'm saying he's like kind of like a store brand version of Marc Marquez in certain ways, I would say.
Last corners in Argentina.
Yes. Sure.
Or first corners in Balaton, as we saw this weekend. Like, he hasn't lost that skill.
But MotoGP collectively decided across what happened at Ducati with Andrea Dovizioso and what happened at Suzuki with the engine and the slightly unfavorable comparison to Alex Rins at the end of it, that he was basically more hassle than he's worth, and he's prodigious speed required. But suddenly, if you create a power vacuum at the top, then a lot more manufacturers go, well, wait a minute. Like, if the difference now between fully unlocking this guy isn't like second place maximum, because Marc still exists, because Marc cuts off all routes to the top.
Yeah.
No, Andrea Iannone is suddenly maybe you go and you look, is this the most like talented guy on the grid apart from Rossi, who's 40? Well, I'm hyperbole, obviously.
I can I can get more hyperbolic with this, though, because genuinely, during the Moto2 years, I was convinced that Andrea Iannone was the only person who was a raw speed match for Marc Marquez from that generation coming through. I was absolutely certain of that based on what they were both doing in the intermediate tier. Obviously, Andrea Iannone's career then goes off the rails for all sorts of wild and increasingly wacky reasons. But like, in our 2015 Revisited series for Patreon, which will resume shortly with Silverstone and a lovely Danilo Petrucci interview about Silverstone that Ollie did for us on a Superbike weekend. I cannot wait to bring that to you. We will get back on with 2015 on Patreon very soon. But yeah, 2015, doing that series has made me think about Iannone's best bits so much, because so much of the first half of that year, he was getting the job done when Dovi wasn't. And it just feels like his career turns on, I was going to say very small things, very attention-grabbing things his career turns on. But it's like, once he's lost that Ducati seat, everything else is a desperate attempt to make up for his career going off course. If he doesn't take out Dovi in that race,
yes,
being very generous, everything is different and brilliant from there. Being more realistic, he takes out Dovi at a different race and everything still falls apart. But you're not mad, Val, to say that with no Marquez, Iannone gets taken a lot more seriously. However, I think my other theory on this is even better news for you particularly, because if same principle, if Marquez isn't there, who is the rising star? Who is the young person that everyone wants? It's Maverick Vinales. Yeah. Surely he is the mid 2010s rising superpower.
He probably doesn't go to Suzuki, does he?
Because Honda comes in, or Yamaha comes in.
He goes straight to a satellite team for one of those instead, and then does his factory stint.
Yeah,
or again, even a factory team if you're in a situation.
Did the rules allow it at that point? Yeah, they did.
Well, because they broke them for Mark. Yeah.
So the rules don't change.
Yeah, the rules don't change.
So it becomes the Marc Marquez rule becomes the Maverick Vinales rule, and he goes straight to factory Yamaha.
The rules change anyway because they were just fucking stupid.
Yeah, no, it's just
so
stupid.
bleep machine there, please. Yeah. But that was a stupid rule.
The other weird tangent I'm going to throw in here as well is speaking of people being taken more seriously by MotoGP, I think without a Marc Marquez, Jonathan Rea probably becomes a MotoGP rider.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be. I mean, again, it creates a vacuum. If it's not necessarily at factory Honda, it's somewhere.
No, it's not necessarily, But I think it becomes easier to convince him to come over onto a decent bike because suddenly there's one, like you say, Matt, there's 8 good bikes at this point.
Yeah.
There's 2 satellites and 2 factories from the 2 factories. And
here's a guy.
There's a space for him.
Here's a guy. Jonathan Rea, that's a good shout. I like it. Here's a guy who popped up in my head like a half a second after Maverick Vinales did by default. Paul Espargaro is a big one. Moto2 champion, pretty good in episodes at Tech 3. Yamaha obviously had some slightly rough patches there, but at a certain point, when Paul was concluding his Tech 3 stint at Yamaha, there was a feeling of like, you don't have to have him in a factory team, but you could if you need to. He'd do totally good. He'd do absolutely okay. And suddenly, again, Mark's absence means a reshuffle. Reshuffle means somewhere like a spot is missing. Maybe if Maverick is moved away to somewhere else, maybe Paul Espargaro goes to Suzuki, does reasonably well there, I would imagine. There's a lot going on. Suddenly,
his teammates at Suzuki.
Ooh, I didn't even think of that, even though that's the logical extension.
Yeah.
Lordy.
That would be fun.
That would.
I feel that would hurt familial relationships. Yeah.
I also think this works out well for Alex Rins. I think he falls in that Vinales category of someone who gets taken seriously earlier because there's a power vacuum, and that potentially means he goes to Repsol straight away.
Here's another one, and it's very I guess it's very easy to do that, but I think for all of them, the case for me makes sense. It just depends on whether you have somebody in there who believes in you, and suddenly who. So Jack Miller got exiled to the Mark VDS land of. Not much going on apart from when conditions equalized things and suddenly stuff was going on. But obviously Jack Miller was a Honda bet. Does Honda as readily sort of put him on the C side of things if it doesn't have Mark? You don't have to worry about that kind of thing if you have Mark, but if you don't have Mark.
Miller's problem will always be that the RCV 1000 was awful. And it essentially, there was a limited number of Hondas because half the Hondas were just the worst bike they'd ever built.
Yeah.
But there's a difference. The thing I mean is you can just keep them on there if you don't really care that much. If you're just do whatever.
Yeah, true.
But if there's some sort of if you need to find your next guy, and you'll see like a wet session, a session on a drying track, etc. And you'll be like, is this our next guy? Could this be? Should we give him like a proper chance and a proper bike one of these seasons? It doesn't mean that he makes it all the way to the top. Doesn't mean that he arrives at the, say, like for instance, 2020 spec Jack Miller could have won a MotoGP title in certain circumstances. Does that mean he gets there earlier and actually gets a bike to at least be in a conversation one season or the other season? Probably not, but there's, suddenly no Marc means, free for all. Everybody else aging. And also one more. Does Casey Stoner try to return at some point? I mean, probably not, I guess.
No,
but
it doesn't change anything for Casey.
Okay.
So I think the conclusion to this segment is that Vinales, Miller, and Rins and both the Espargaro brothers all win world championships, and Danny Pedrosa still doesn't.
For Danny.
Right, let's nip forward to the present day, and I'm going to combine two of your questions for this. So James asked, if Marquez had gone to Aprilia for 2025 instead of Jorge Martin, would it be performing better than it currently has been with Marco Bezzecchi? And on a similar note, this one's from Alex Dukes, who asks, let's find Alice on my list. If Marc Marquez had signed for KTM in 2025 rather than Ducati, would he still be leading the championship given his riding style and their unpredictable performance? Could he have been the guiding light that KTM seems to have been missing? And Alice throws in the important factor of if Marc had signed for a different manufacturer, Jorge Martin would have presumably got the vacant Ducati seat, and by extension of that, likely wouldn't have injured himself. So who wants to go first with, well, whichever bike really? Marquez on an Aprilia, Marquez on a KTM. How does this year look different?
Marquez on an Aprilia is leading the championship, but not by the margin that he's leading the championship right now. And we've actually got a bit of a decent title fight between him and Alex, or him and Pecco and Jorge. I don't think Alex will be. I don't know. I guess Alex is still in the mix, isn't he? But
must be.
But I think Marc is still, like, the Aprilia is good. Bez is basically doing in the Aprilia right now what he was doing in the Ducati in 23, when the Ducati was the best bike in the grid. Occasionally winning races, being a fairly, floating around the periphery of the podium regularly. That's a sign that it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And I think Marc is the difference that you add to that, because he's now fully fit, Marc. He's now healthy and attacking and aggressive, and, and obviously I'm not really leaving much leeway to measure adaptation time, right? So I'm not really taking that into account whenever I say he's leading the championship. But I think he's pretty good at that anyway. And I think if Bez could do it in the period that he's been able to do it and win races, then obviously so can Marc. So the bike's pretty close to a Ducati. Yeah, I think he's comfortably leading the championship and on track to winning it.
Before we go on to KTM, my attempt to disprove your theory is, what about this first third of the season before Silverstone? Actually, probably not a third, that's probably like a fifth in this long calendar.
Yeah, exactly. It's like,
At that bit, every time we looked at Bez, he was flying off the road on lap 3 under braking and then ending up 13th.
Bez did that in a Ducati as well.
But I feel like Aprilia's had problems that it's solved to get as good as it is now.
The thing is, we don't know if Aprilia have had problems because they've had one rider who wasn't there, one rider who's just joined the manufacturer, one rider who's a rookie, and one rider who is captain inconsistency. So how do you measure Aprilia's real level in the first few races without them having kept one, either Aleix or Maverick, fundamentally? And I think in the absence of that, you can only kind of presume that the bike suddenly didn't go from being the second best bike in the grid to being the fifth best bike in the grid for 6 races and then bounce back to be the second best bike again. I think what we've seen from the start of this year is their riders more than their bike. And I think Marc kind of makes up for that by being Marc.
All right, Val, unless you want to argue Simon out of that Aprilia championship bid theory, what's your take on how he'd be doing on a KTM?
Well, no, I'm not thinking about it. This is easy for me. If Marc's on the KTM, Jorge Martin is a 2-time MotoGP world champion. And if Marc's on the Aprilia, Jorge Martin is a 2-time MotoGP world champion. For me, that's not... I think that's... It would be close on the Aprilia, I think, but it wouldn't be so close at this point in the season, assuming Aprilia keeps up the same development track. we have seen that Marc is not omnipotent. We have seen it last season. He had a bike that was 4/10 off, and he could not win the championship with it or come particularly close, which is fine. That's a huge gap. I think at a big stretch of the season, at least, Aprilia has been in some way, shape, or form 4/10 off. It isn't right now, but I think it certainly was at some parts of the season. He is quite robust clearly at riding unstable bikes to their limit in terms of pace, but he isn't always robust at picking up the most points for them. So the issues of stability that Bezzecchi was having with Aprilia, I'm not so sure that Marc would just come in and go, all right, that's 25 points, that's 25 points, that's 25 points. I don't think so. I think he would leave points on the table. I've seen him do it on limited bikes, more limited bikes, obviously, than this one, but I remember the start to his final Honda season. I think it was his final Honda season, where you almost could talk yourself into Marc having the pace always to put up the points needed to be genuinely in the title race until like the wheels totally fell off. But even in those early moments, literally. But even in those early moments, it was requiring too much. He was having to do too much. And when you have to do too much, you go off, you lose points. You lose points that you can't afford to lose against the Ducatis that, okay, so Bagnaia can't do sprints. I mean, that's fundamentally, I don't think he's as unhappy with the 25, although again, against Martin, depends how Martin would have adapted to whatever change happened there. I think he probably would have been okay, I suspect, but I'm not really basing that off of anything other than my impression of Jorge Martin, the MotoGP rider. It's not like Jorge Martin has also had a bad season with a Ducati that didn't work for him. It was his second season that cost him the immediate factory promotion versus Enea Bastianini. I think this season he would have done okay, assuming he stays healthy. I think with Bagnaia's total inability to finish a sprint in a normal position, Martin's, I think he's out of sight, potentially. For Marc and Aprilia, I don't know. I think if I've seen the recent Bezzecchi form, it's incredible. So we probably do presume an uptick for Marc. So he definitely wins a fair few and maybe is somewhat like in half striking distance. I just think that being ahead for me is a stretch. Maybe I'm wrong. KTM, I don't know.
Neither of us really considered that.
I don't get it with KTM. What I do know is that there's been a lot of backlash to Pedro Costa on the KTM this season. And Marc would be doing better, but I don't know that he'd be doing like 3 times as many points better. I think that's a bit much.
And obviously to have signed him for this season, they'd have had to have paid him in a warehouse full of pre-registered KTMs.
This is true. This is true. And
no
bicycles,
Yeah. Kate, if he was there, that'd be very much for the love of a brand he's shown no love for so far.
The one thing I will counter with what you did say, though, Val, is I don't think it's a given that Jorge Martin is leading the championship if Marc doesn't go to Ducati, because I think if Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia both discovered the same problems with the GP25, the GP25 never exists.
Okay.
Because the only reason the GP25 existed is because Marc was quicker on it than Pecco, and Pecco thought he had to give it a chance to find it. Yeah. So I think without Marc there, they raced the GP24, and Pecco's as competitive as Martin again.
That is such a good point. Because the thing that I was stuck on with this question and the Jorge Martin at Ducati element is, how much does Martin get stuck in the same ruts as Bagnaia, but without the sprint problem? How much of Bagnaia's problem this year is Bagnaia versus the 2025 Ducati just being a trickier bike that's taken a bit of a step backwards if you're not Marc. Yeah. But like you say, Pecco just goes, no, we're not going to do this, and probably Martin agrees, unless Martin wants to really kind of strut his peacock tail around a bit and go, no, we will do this bike. But then they probably still listen to Pecco.
Their strengths are in the same place.
Yeah.
So I think it's very easy for him to agree with Pecco.
Yeah, true.
Because I might be wrong with the like Martin confidence specifically, because just last year feels like so long ago. But last year Pecco Bagnaia was quicker, not by a lot,
he was
by a little bit. And projecting, obviously Jorge Martin is newer to MotoGP. Jorge Martin, just basically for me, he hasn't had as much time and as much opportunity to fully 100% show who he really is in terms of high ceiling MotoGP potential, but that might not be fair to Pecco looking at it. I think the Pecco sprints thing is for me, indisputable, but it is also very likely that on Sunday they're just beating each other up all the time. And somebody can get in, like Marc, like Alex Marquez, if they go to the GP24, poor Fabio Di Giannantonio is suddenly an actual factor consideration. Franco Morbidelli, I don't know, because his pace sags so badly.
Changes.
Yeah, in the second half of the race. But it's all of those guys, and if all of them are taking points off each other somehow, then suddenly, Marc definitely comes into the picture then. If Martin clicks, or if he steps up a gear potentially just through years on years, not even through going to the factory team, through just his development, then I think it would be hard to stop.
So the conclusion from this segment, I think, is that basically any scenario in which Marc Marquez isn't on the factory Ducati in 2025 is a really good championship.
It's a better one for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if he's on a Pramac, because he said he never do, he walks it. If he's on a
Pramac Yamaha.
No,
Pramac Ducati.
Well, he would have been a Pramac Ducati, wouldn't he?
He would never have left.
You tripped me up.
Let's not underestimate how much Marquez entirely broke the system and the ladder and the lift and the elevator and everything else while making this decision for this year. Right, let's reverse the start of Marquez's MotoGP career for this one. Nicolas de Riviere says, would Marquez's MotoGP rise since 2013 have looked the same if he'd signed with any other team, or was it truly tied to the way Honda was willing to thoroughly build their bikes around him for the first decade he was in Grand Prix racing? So, Marquez going somewhere other than Honda, how would that look, Simon?
Marquez going to Yamaha, I think would have played out fairly similarly. Maybe without the immediate success, because the Yamaha needed to be rode in a slightly different way, and the Honda obviously worked quite well with him. But at the same time, if you put him on a Yamaha to start 2013, then we probably don't wait till Coda for him to win his first race. He probably does it in Qatar because the circuit suits the bike better. Yeah, I think Marquez going to Ducati back then, or going to another manufacturer, he becomes Pedro Acosta, who everyone knows is better than what he's doing right now.
Yeah,
but on a Yamaha, I think he can still be Marc Marquez. But you have to remember, this is the era of 4 good bikes, and he got one of them. Yeah. The only other option that would have allowed him to even attempt to become Marc Marquez was a Yamaha.
Yeah. But what about this element that Nicholas mentions about how thoroughly Honda gravitated around Marquez? I just think that probably happens wherever he goes, because when you get a rider like that, no matter who the incumbent is, you're going to start designing the bike that this guy wants.
Yeah.
So I think the mechanism is important. I think you can't really talk about it in the abstract, because you need to specifically think about where you place him within Yamaha, right? And so the options there are Yamaha. I presume the idea is that Yamaha just doesn't go in for Rossi.
Yeah.
Right? And it just slots in Marc Marquez alongside Jorge Lorenzo, and Rossi goes somewhere. Because the other option would be Rossi comes in and Marc somehow, for whatever reason, ends up on Tech 3. Maybe somebody at the FIM is like, no, you can't have rookies on. We're not going to do this rule change. And then Honda loses interest. I can't really imagine that. But let's say
at Tech 3, he doesn't do anything. Because this is the generation of time when Tech 3 got the hand-me-downs from it wasn't like right now where every factory has a satellite that's on equal machinery. The Tech 3 bike was always worse.
Yeah, but not by that much. By
it was across the season.
Yeah,
because it was it always started and had a few good races and then tailed off. And I think if you chat to Hervé Poncharal about it, there's a reason he's a KTM team now, and it's because of the level of support they weren't getting. So I think on a Tech 3 bike, Marc doesn't do anything.
But I'm just thinking, like, James Toseland, Ben Spies, Bradley Smith, Paul had their moments on Tech 3 bikes. Okay,
just going to point out that not one of those guys ever won a race.
No, okay. But none of those guys was Marc. That, I think, is the difference.
Did you just say Ben Spies did win a race?
On a factory Yamaha.
Yeah. Got really confused for a second.
Yeah, when we were all celebrating for Tech 3 when Oliveira got that win, it turns out we'd forgotten that Ben Spies did it, obviously.
Tech 3 and 14 was enough for Dovi. No, Yeah, in 14 was enough for Dovi to... No, in 13. In one of those. In 12. One of those years. Tech 3 was enough for Dovi to rebuild his career, was enough for Cal to rebuild his...
Yeah. But we're talking about Marc Marquez. We're not talking about Cal Crutchlow or Andrea
Yeah,
Dovizioso.
but it means that certainly it would have... I think there would have been enough to put him next in line.
Yeah,
whatever seat opens up at any of the four...
But it wouldn't have been enough to do anything close to what he did in 13 and 14.
No, I agree.
That's the angle I'm looking at it from.
I'm going to go Larry and say that Marquez is that good. He'd have won a race or two on a mid-2010s Tech 3 Yamaha.
Oh, you could do that because, again, if you...
I think that's possible. Definitely not
joust the track with something for a second, or like if you wash away the grip. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, or if he'd been able to count properly at Phillip Island. Because he'd still have been at the sharp end on that one, you know?
Yeah, true.
And again, Miller won the Dutch TT on a bike that we don't necessarily consider a MotoGP bike when we look back at it. So, yeah.
Yeah, good point.
No offense to Mark VDS, but I mean...
Yeah. We're answering all these Marc Marquez questions today as part of a competition we've been running with Insta360 to win an Insta360 Ace Pro 2 MM93 Edition camera signed by Marc. That's the Marc Marquez special edition with various Marquez-y touches, and we've got an autographed one to give away. Like I said, we have hundreds and hundreds of questions. We've answered a few of them in the In-Car Marquez video in our YouTube channel. We've answered a few of them in a website article, 10 big Marc Marquez career what-if questions, where we go through even more hypotheticals than we have done on this podcast. At the end of this podcast, we will announce the winner of the competition, who is the person we felt gave the best question of the hundreds and hundreds we received. But let's answer one more before we get into that. Also, if you're watching this podcast on our YouTube channel and you're wondering where on earth I am, because it looks like Matt on the road this week, I'm recording in a random church hall. You can see pews in the background, possibly a tennis table. I'm actually doing this podcast while on holiday with a large family group. We've hired what is basically a manor house, which isn't always the best place to record a podcast from, but hopefully I found a corner that works. I
like that it's early in the morning, so you're kind of doing your late night radio DJ voice to not wake anyone up.
Oh, this is a holiday with 7 kids between the ages of 0 and 6, so everyone has been awake since 5.
But clearly you live in a manor, so you got people to take care of them.
He's in the manor for the summer, Val.
Right, yeah.
Of course. This is my summer mansion.
Summering in the mansion.
Lord Beer.
Okay, fine, yeah. Thank you for completely losing my thread. And the last question, which I'll now attempt to find again. Okay, this is from either the Subros, the Subros, or the Subros, depending on how I want to pronounce this.
Subarus.
Subarus, great.
No, Subarus, it's the cars.
Subarus.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. This is from a Super Impreza. It's not. Had Marc Marquez not broken his arm in 2020, even though the Honda was in decline, who do you think would have won the championship from 2020 to 23?
Marc Marquez.
Marc Marquez on those Hondas, even without the injuries. Was it you're suggesting that the injury was the bigger factor?
Yeah, the injury was the bigger factor. I mean, the injury was obviously the bigger factor in 2020 because he didn't race. But let's not forget what he was doing for the first half of the race that he did compete in. He was like insanely competitive, even on a bike that wasn't that good. And I think that would have carried through at least through the rest of 2020. And he would have been comfortable and fast and strong without a problem. I think we would have seen it into 21. And then it becomes a bit more of a question mark. But like all of the crashes that we saw, I think all of the difficulties were all related to injuries that all stem back to the arm. You know, the concussion, the double vision thing obviously was a factor as well. But that all stems back to the fact that he was riding with one arm. For me, I don't think the bike was the bigger question mark. I think the fact that he was so beaten up was, and I think maybe it's been a case of the bike. We know the bike is bad and so bad that he left, and that has covered up for the fact that he was in a really, really, really bad situation that's never been fully explained, never really been fully opened up to yet.
I mean, I'm gonna bring up the numbers that I did for this in the web version because I think it's a fun way to look at it. But without the numbers for 2020, there's no average points per round for Marc for 2020 because he barely did any rounds. But Marc wins 2020 if he stays healthy. I don't think that's I don't think that's particularly complicated for me.
It wasn't the strongest season.
It was not the strongest season. He was going to come through to second place at Jerez after going to the back.
Yeah.
I think he wins it 50 times over for me, but he didn't. So yeah, but 21, he scored 10.1 points per round. Champion Fabio Quartararo 15.4. Without the injury, I think that gap you can cover. I think that's okay. And again, that's without even getting into the fact that a Honda would not have been as much of a downward slope in terms of the bike they actually make with his presence. At least he's always felt that way. I think he's always suggested to the media, like dropping like half hints that, look, if I stuck around and if I didn't skip those years and if I wasn't absent for that exact moment, then the bike won't have been in the situation that it ended up in. Now, whether that's true or not, I mean, he'll feel that way. I don't know how the engineering crew at Honda will feel, for instance, but they might very well agree that, if he was around to shout orders at them or whatever, maybe it would have been better. But
they probably hope so, because they've all been sacked since. Because Honda basically cleared them all out, so they don't hope that him being there.
22 Marc on 9.4 points. Pecco Bagnaia 13.2. He won the championship averaging 13.2, which I think does tell you a lot about the way that season played out. Also, because Pecco was, of course, famously 91 points back at one moment in the championship. I think that's doable. I think that's coverable with a healthy fit Marc with Honda continuity. 23. Marc's on 6.4 per round. Bagnaia is on 23.3. We have sprints now, so it's not like... So Bagnaia's season wasn't that good. It was good, but it was not that. There, I think suddenly is where you enter into the territory of the Ducati has finally put too much of a buffer for Honda to keep winning with Marc. For me, again, we don't know how the development would have played out, but yeah, I feel 99% confident about 2000. I'm like in the 80% range for 21 and 22, and I don't feel great about 23.
I think you looking at it statistically, what that tells me is Marc sees out his Honda contract.
Yes.
And then starts to look at going elsewhere, but he sees out that contract.
Sure.
Because he's still winning things.
Yeah.
Or he gets beaten by Pecco and calls it a day, because he's beaten all the records there are to beat. And Pecco beats him in 23. The Ducati looks really good, and Marc says, you know what? Job done.
I wonder if he's the kind of guy who wants to retire with a championship belt. Probably not.
Imagine that.
I don't.
I can imagine that.
I don't
think
know.
we'll find out.
Yeah,
Well,
I
yeah.
can imagine that now.
Yeah.
Skipping to a completely different question that I've just made up. Now that I think legacy is more in his head because of the enforced time, fearing it would never happen, fearing it'd never be the race to the standard again. Now I think he wants to go on the proper high.
There was a question on the sheet, and we didn't read it out, but I think it's like this is part of this conversation. Somebody said, what does Marc need to do now to become the undisputed greatest of all time? Like, what's the next steps? And it's switched to another manufacturing win again, isn't it? That would remove the debate. That would completely, like, if you do it on a third one, then fair enough. I think if he keeps winning on the Ducati, you could still make your Valentino Rossi arguments, I think. If he goes back to Honda, picks it up off its knees or something like that, or if he goes to one of the other groups and snipes another championship going into his, the second half of his 30s, then you go, you're the man. You've got it. You've done it. You've completed MotoGP. Congratulations. I guess he already has, but you know what I mean.
That's probably dig the sheet back out. And Dan Neal, we've just answered your question as a bonus in this episode. So
right.
I think you'll appreciate that, Dan. My skepticism, I'm going to disagree with you both a little bit on this. My skepticism is that the Honda, from 2019 even, Honda was going off the rails. Marc has been holding the Honda up for a while before he gets hurt. Ducati is getting better and better. Yamaha, with Fabio Quartararo, has a period of being genuinely really good as well before Yamaha goes completely off the boil. Can Marc, without injuries, keep an ailing Honda that is going off the rails regardless of him ahead of those two bikes. Does Marc not get injured anyway from the desperation he'll be riding with by that time? Like if that broken arm doesn't happen, does a different broken arm happen? Does another head injury happen? Yes, okay, most of those crashes maybe happened because he was riding with 1.5 or fewer arms. A lot of them happened because he was getting frustrated with what Honda was doing as well, though. And I don't see that not getting the Jerez 2020 injury completely erases that element.
Sure. No, I think that's valid. I think that's fair. It depends on the size of the development gap, I guess. Which, I mean, that's what it always depends on. That's the answer at the end of the day. The bike is the answer, and then you try to get a guy like Marc to cover. And Marc has covered more than basically if not anyone, then like one or two people in MotoGP history in terms of, you know, the amount of making up he's done for bike deficiency. But at the end of the day, the simplest factor is getting if you get a Desmond Tedici level bike. I mean, look at this season. The reason I've been saying that like Marc is a luxury hire for this season is because they win the championship with Pecco, they win it with Alex Marquez, they win it with Jorge Martin.
They win it with Maverick Vinales.
The only reason to hire Maverick or to hire Marc this year for Ducati was to make sure he didn't win the championship, but sneak a championship to someone else.
That's a good point.
It's the only reason to have him this year because they don't need him.
So I think this leads us very nicely onto what we've chosen in a 2-1 vote as the winning question. This was very hard. We all spent a lot of time looking at the sheet. There was debate over whether we go for our favourite hypothetical. Val was up for that. There was a debate over whether we go for one of the slightly crazy ones, which I thought that might not be.
Marquez can't cook. Alex is the chef in the house.
We have established that one. So, but that wasn't quite a winner. My gut feeling was we should go for a question that kind of encapsulates what gets to the core of Marquez in terms of not personality, but like on track ability. And I think that Colin Georgeson's question is the one that has hit that best. And I'm going to quickly find it on the sheet because I skipped across to a different question when Val started answering one at random.
I'm just going to say the Matter Lord is getting his way again. Unacceptable. It's going to make me go work the fields in the next half hour.
Who else is doing this podcast from a mansion? Who else has pictures on the downstairs wall of people that I executed in the Civil War?
Right. I thought they were pictures of you. Paintings commissioned by Ruben Cervantes or whatever. Did Ruben Cervantes write Don Quixote? Is that not even a?
I don't think
so. Is that not even a painter? Who's Ruben Cervantes? Did I make him up? I'm gonna Google that. That's more important.
I have an oil painting directly above me that I did commission and got painted, but it was as an elaborate joke for my wife, so it makes no sense out of context. So I'm not even going to try to explain it in the podcast.
Ruben Cervantes is Javier Bardem's character in the F1 movie. I'm going to quit this podcast now. I have to leave.
Javier Bardem's in the F1 movie?
Javier Bardem's in the F1 movie. That was, man. Well, Miguel Cervantes is somebody. I'm going to check that now.
Race Members Club in the comments on Patreon, let us know whoever Val is talking about actually is.
Miguel Cervantes de Cervantes wrote Don Quixote.
Okay,
Jesus Christ, that was awful. My clout is gone. Gone.
Oh my goodness. Right.
Ask the question, Matt.
I'll ask the question. I'll actually find the question again and ask the question after this fantastic, even by our standards, tangent.
Normally this only happens late at night, not early.
I was going to say, normally this is normally late night podcast moves rather than early morning ones. Okay, I found the question. Colin Georgeson, this is your question. Is Marc Marquez a genius who understands the limits of a bike better than anyone else, or is he a risk taker who constantly defies them? And what does that say about what it takes to dominate in modern MotoGP? He is one of the riders with the most extreme crashes, but also the most insane races where he is outperforming his bike over and over again. So this cuts to the heart of Marc Marquez for me. Is he just an insane risk taker who manages through his own skill to get away with it? Or is his awareness of what a bike can actually really do just that bit more than everybody else, so he sees and can actually fulfill these possibilities? Simon, you can go first with this, and then Val can argue with us.
So I'm not being boring when I say this, but he's both. And I'm not trying to weasel out of answering the question. He is an incredibly instinctive rider, right? He's insanely... talented isn't the right word, because I don't think that I don't think it really explains it. He's, we've talked about this before, right? He has this sixth sense that lets him ride a motorbike. There is obviously something in his brain where he processes information faster. He has better balance than the normal human. He is more physically adept to, being able to process things quickly. He works on a different level from everyone else, I think. Which is a thing that happens when certain elite athletes insert, Michael Phelps is like the genetic perfect specimen to swim. And someone threw him in a swimming pool and the result was like unlimited gold medals. And there is an element of that with Marc, where he is obviously wired to be the greatest MotoGP rider we've seen in recent times. But I think because of that, there's no... I don't want this. If I say that, it's going to sound really mean. No, I'm going to say it anyway. So there's not the same racing intelligence that Marc as there is with other riders like Dovi, because he doesn't have to think about it as much. It just happens naturally to him, and he doesn't really have to think about why. He's just fast, and I think because of that, some of the crashes, especially in the Honda era, came because the Marc Marquez way of sensing the limits of the bike isn't to think about them too much. It's just to ride to them, crash, and then go a little bit easier the next time because he's capable of doing that. And we've never seen another rider capable of that. There is no other rider I have ever seen who crashes almost purposely to find the limit of the bike and then dials it back a little bit. That's completely unique to him. And I think Colin's question said that, spectacular crashes. Marc's crashes generally aren't. They're generally quite, slow speed slide offs, tuck the front because that's the limit of the front tire. So I'll get back on the bike immediately and then just go a little bit slower, a little bit less lean angle, because he has the ability in his brain, because he computes things so rapidly, to discern the difference between 61 and 62 degrees lean angle. And that's not normal. That's not human. That's what makes him really, really stand out for me. And I think it needs the combination of those two factors. If he didn't have the confidence, the ability to understand that lets him basically feel like he can make those crashes and get away with it, he wouldn't be as big of a risk taker. But he takes the risks because he knows he can get away with it, because he can understand the limits of the bike in that way and make it work. So the two are basically, to put it in a slightly more elegant way than, they're both right, so I'm just going to chicken out. The two are kind of inextricably linked. He one lets him be the other and vice versa.
Yeah. I have an even more boring answer. I mean, not that the answer was boring. The answer was
actually great, wasn't it?
Yeah. Mine will be really boring, and it's I don't know. But the thing is
that was a rubbish answer.
That was worse than mine.
Yeah. My belief is that there's only so much that, because we're talking pure bravery, but also bravery can mean a few different things. But it's like basically the willingness to risk crashes and to risk hurting yourself in a way. But I just don't believe in that as being the primary differentiator in MotoGP these days, where the margins are so fine that I think there's just a baseline level of abandon that the entire grid operates on. And that's not really the decider in any sort of condition. It's not that kind of bravery. It's the bravery of how good are you at knowing which warnings to ignore and which to heed, especially in the condition, because the conditions I always think about, and it is the one where you see it most clearly, is there are two guys on this grid who can do outrageous stuff in mixed conditions, and they are Marc Marquez and Jack Miller. I don't know that they're braver than anybody else. I don't know if they're less scared of crashing than anybody else. I mean, Jack does give off that vibe sometimes, that he doesn't care what's going to happen come gravel trap. But you can't find 1.5 seconds just by doing that without crashing. The other guys would do that if they felt they could get away with it. The thing is that Marc and Jack get away with it all the time, consistently. They get away with it. They do not fall at a higher rate in those conditions, despite their willingness to push harder in those conditions, which to me just means that they're operating on a different level of, as Simon said, comfort and awareness of, again, the warnings they need to heed, the warnings they need to ignore. That's in the mixed conditions. And in the dry, obviously, yes, the thing with Marc being willing to test the limits of pushing by having the ever present low sides and the willingness to top crash rankings at the end of the season. It is part of it. I don't think it's the secret, but it's part of the game. Again, I think the secret is just that can only give you so much corner after corner, because at a certain point, it's not a conscious risk assessment you're making. I mean, Lord knows, I don't know that Marquez makes many conscious risk assessments during MotoGP sessions. It doesn't feel that way.
No.
I mean, he says he does, and fair enough. But sometimes, he also says that, come race time, I just got to go. I just got to go where it takes me. So that's why it's difficult for me. It's understanding where the difference is between it being like, does it matter whether it's conscious or subconscious? Does it matter whether it's something that we would describe as bravery or something that we would describe as comfort? I guess it's very interesting, but there's no great way of testing it without like hooking up some wires to his brain while he's doing a lap, and then, I don't know, putting another person on a bike and hoping they make it past 2 corners.
That's our next Insta360 video, Val. We've just arranged that for your next trip.
Great,
we're going to wire you up, stick you on a Ducati.
The Matter Lord says it, so it must be right. It must be.
Yeah, I need to actually finish this podcast now to gather troops to invade a rival village.
At least you have a moat to defend your own keep.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're well set here. On that note, thank you so much for all of the many, many questions. Thank you, Valentine, for talking this much about Marc Marquez on this podcast, the previous video, all the other Marquez stuff we've done. There's been so much planning around this that at the start of the episode, we were like, another Marquez thing? But we've been talking Marquez constantly for this competition.
Thankfully, it's not going to come up for the rest of the season because he's not that important to 2025, is he?
To be fair, he's basically already won the title, so we can just start concentrating on everyone else now.
Yeah, in fairness, I feel like we're not going to lead many more episodes on Marc Marquez for the rest of the season. We're going to be looking for what's happening behind him even more than we have been already so far. So yeah, I'm off to gather my invading force. We'll be back next week with something else when I'm recording from either my kitchen or my part painted office room again, rather than the mansion.